What's going on, guys? Welcome to the MIgardener channel. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to reduce mold on your plant starts. So we've got a couple things going on in our grow room, and we're starting to get some mold. Now mold, a lot of people freak out when they see it, and they instantly dispose their plants. You can actually control mold very simply with some simple household ingredients. We're going to talk about that because mold is not necessarily hurting the plants as much as the growing conditions are hurting the plants. That's what we're going to talk about in today's episode. Let's go. So like I said, I've got some mold happening in these planters here, and it's not that I'm doing something wrong. I want you to be very clear that if you have mold yourself, you might not be doing something wrong either. What we're dealing with is just a lot of soil, and one of the downsides of a lot of soil is it tends to hold on to excess moisture a little while longer. We're not outside, right? There's no wind. We could put a fan in here and that would help to dry things out, but only to a certain extent. And so you could put a fan in to help dry things out. But there's also not the bright sun. There's not as much temperature fluctuations that help to expedite that evaporating. And so your soil tends to stay damper longer, and dampness is a harbinger of mold. Mold absolutely loves damp conditions. And so a lot of times you have cases like this where you have a big container holding 5-6 gallons of soil, or like in our smart pots here. And these smart pots are holding about 3.5 gallons of soil. Now, these are going to stay wet for a very long time. That's the nature of having this much soil indoors. They just don't dry out that fast. So the downside to having that much moisture is you're going to have some mold. The second reason why you might be getting mold in your indoor garden is because of organic material in your potting mix. A lot of potting mixes contain organic material, and organic material basically just adds fluff. It adds that kind of bulk to your mix. And so a lot of potting mixes do contain little chunks of wood, little bits of debris. That's very common. And when that stays wet in the conditions we have for a long period of time, the mold actually starts to break that down. That's mold's job. Mold will actually decompose organic material, and that's what happens in a compost pile out in your garden. So when you have organic material indoors in a large container that can't dry out very frequently, it's a perfect recipe for mold. Like I said, mold is not necessarily going to be hurting these plants. It's actually, mold is considered the canary in the coal mine. Coal miners, if you haven't heard this story, coal miners would actually bring a canary in a cage down into the mine because canaries are very sensitive to environmental changes. And what they would find is that if the canary was not chirping, the canary was most likely dead. Sounds very sad, but the thing is that canary would die a lot faster than the humans would in unsafe working conditions. And so they'd bring a canary down there in case the environment had too much heavy metals, not enough oxygen, a whole lot of different reasons why the environment would change, and that would be the canary in the coal mine. The more you know. But the mold is the canary in the coal mine for an environmental condition that is not good for plants. Plants do not live in the same condition that mold does. A lot of gardeners make this mistake of thinking that mold is in fact the reason why their plants are dying. It's not. It's actually the growing conditions that are not ideal for the plants to be growing in, because mold can survive where plants can't. So now we're going to talk about preventing mold. Like I said, there's a few different prevention mechanisms that you can apply in your grow room or in your home. And the one thing is by not watering as frequently, right? Obviously, if mold likes moisture, by not watering as frequently is going to be reducing that environment that mold loves to thrive in. The downside is when you're dealing with these big, large pots that hold 5-10 gallons of soil, they're always going to be damp, right? So it's not the same as a little starter container. Now, if you're getting mold in little starter containers, the first thing I'd recommend is dialing back your water and not watering as frequently. Second thing is adding a fan. That's going to help to blow air over the soil, which is going to help to actually dry that plant out and help to actually reduce the environment that mold loves to thrive in. You can do that for starter containers, your little starter plugs. Big pots like this or large house plants, they need a different approach. And so we're going to kind of take a two-pronged approach to really attack the mold at a couple different angles, because that's kind of what it takes to grow plants in big pots indoors without mold. Now, the first thing you can do to combating mold indoors with large containers is by switching up to these fabric pots. Now, I absolutely love this grow tower. I think it's very cool, but Downside is plastic. Even though, this plastic is very functional, it doesn't breathe, right? It has its pros and cons, but this fabric here allows the plant to breathe, so you're gonna be getting evaporation out of the sides of the pot and the top of the pot, meaning it's gonna dry out a whole lot faster. That's the first thing that you can do to kind of combating mold in a big container like this. But I do get that it's not very aesthetic, and I do get that, this has its limitations. So let's assume that this is not working for you, and let's assume you have just plastic pots. Then what can you do? So assuming you don't want to go with fabric pots and you've got a plastic pot that doesn't breathe, now you have to implement some other changes to actually combating the mold, because the mold is, again, it's staying in the soil because there's just so much of it. You could put a fan on this and it's going to dry the top out all day, but there's going to be soil deep down, 5-6 inches deep, that's just never going to fully dry out. And so your plants might be totally fine, but it's allowing that mold to grow, and you want to actually kind of discourage that mold growth. So how do you do that? Well, you can actually help to sterilize the soil using water. So when it comes to sterilizing your soil, you can sterilize it with water, but you're not going to boil water and water your plants with it, because then your plants would die, obviously. But we can add stuff to our water in the form of a soil or a water additive, right? So the water additive is going to be, in this case, white distilled vinegar. We have about 3 tablespoons of white distilled vinegar. We're going to pour that in there. We're going to shake it up, get that in the water, and what that's going to do is going to change the pH of the water. You see, mold likes a very stable pH. If you make it very acidic or very alkaline, and you get away from that very stable pH, very neutral pH, the mold is not going to be able to survive. And so in this case, what we're doing is we're actually changing the pH of the soil very temporarily using white distilled vinegar. And that's why you could actually spray it around, around your sinks, around your kitchen, and actually it is really great to actually kill mold and mildew. And the same applies in your soil. So all we're gonna do then is we're gonna water the soil. Now, again, you wanna be careful. You don't want to splash it up on the leaves too much, but we're watering the soil with the vinegar water. And what this is doing is it's watering the plants. The plants are going to benefit. They're not going to mind it too much. The foliage can burn a little bit if it gets on there. But the plants, they survive in a soil pH of anywhere from 6, even down as low as like 5.5. They're not going to love it, but they're not going to die. Whereas the mold and mildew, it's going to die almost immediately. And so what we're doing is we're essentially sterilizing the soil using an acidic water solution that the plants are going to be fine, but the mold and mildew won't. And so all we're going to do is go through here and do that. And that's the first thing that we can do. All right, the second thing you can do to controlling mold with a water additive is using hydrogen peroxide. Now, hydrogen peroxide works very well at controlling mold, much like the white distilled vinegar does, except the hydrogen peroxide is best used on surface mold. So what you'll notice is over time, you might have some mold that actually blooms. Mold will bloom and it will actually come to the surface. When it comes to the surface, that's really where it affects things like our respiratory system, our lungs, our nose. It might actually affect us because it gets in the air, right? It's actually blooming and it's sending the spores throughout the air. Mold that's deep down in your pots doesn't really affect you all that much until it blooms on the surface. And that's really where hydrogen peroxide works best, because hydrogen peroxide actually gives off a gas. It actually will form carbon dioxide, it bubbles, right? And so it creates a reaction where it actually strips away some of the cell coating on the outside of that mold, and it actually will cause it to dehydrate and prevent it from, prevents it from surviving, but it actually does a whole lot of other things chemically to basically almost strip away the life of the mold and the mildew. And so it is really good on surface mold. It's not as good on deep down mold. For mold that's deep down in the container, because it can't dry out very frequently, I would recommend using some distilled vinegar, because that's going to actually penetrate deep down. It's going to change the pH of the soil deep down, but you can't really get the hydrogen peroxide deep down because it basically bubbles up right on the surface. It reacts very quickly, and that's why if you have an open wound, You put some on the open wound, you're gonna notice it's gonna bubble. It's gonna actually sterilize the wound, but it's not gonna penetrate deep down inside, under the skin, right? It's very surface level how it works, but it is very effective in the same way that, that white distilled vinegar works. Now, I will say that using both of these in combination is my preferred method of controlling mold. In a deep pot like this, you're gonna have deep mold that's deep down, it's almost impossible to completely eradicate it because the pot is never gonna fully dry out. If it does fully dry out, your plants are gonna be suffering because you have to let it dry out so long that there's gonna be moisture that's down in this bottom 3-4 inches of the pot that never fully dries out, and the plants are gonna be like wilting and dying on the surface. So I like to use periodically the white distilled vinegar, but you can't use it all the time, otherwise it can actually negatively affect your plants. I only use white distilled vinegar about once every 3 weeks. Make it very clear, about one time every 3 weeks I will use white distilled vinegar in my soil, and that's because if you use it too frequently, your plants will suffer from that pH being a little too acidic. So I make sure I don't use it too frequently. That's gonna control deep down. And then for surface mold, that's really simple. You could use hydrogen peroxide every single time you water, believe it or not, and it's just gonna control the surface mold. So I find that by reducing how much I'm watering, allow my pots to dry out some, maybe putting a fan in, definitely can help. Applying a water solution with some white distilled vinegar once every 3 weeks, and then anytime after that I need to give a little bit of extra water, I will water with the hydrogen peroxide, and that helps to cut down on the surface mold. It also, like I said, helps to kill anything like your fungus gnats, which love to live in 1 to 2 inches of soil. So those are your ways to controlling mold and mildew in big containers indoors. I really hope that you guys enjoyed. I hope that you all learned something new. If you did, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know if you want to see more videos like this. So take care, everyone. Hope you guys enjoyed, and as always, grow bigger. Bye.